Small Town Secrets. Don Episode 4. The Phantom of Texarkana. Ham. Part 1. A Town on the Line. In the spring of 1946, something dark settled over a small city on the Texas-Arkansas border. For 10 weeks, a hooded figure moved through the night, attacking couples on lonely roads. He came and went like smoke. No one ever proved who he was, and the people of Texarkana never quite stopped looking over their shoulders. This is that story. Pause. Texarkana sits right on the state line. Half the town belongs to Texas. The other half belongs to Arkansas. In 1946, it was a place of about 40,000 people. A railroad town, a lumber town, a town where folks knew their neighbors and left their doors unlocked at night. The war had just ended. The boys were coming home. There was a feeling in the air that the hardest days were behind them. People were ready to live again. They went to picture shows on Saturday nights. They drove out to the lakes. Young couples parked on the dark roads outside of town, the way young couples do, and they felt safe enough doing it. That sense of safety was about to disappear. Pause. It began on a cool Friday night in late February, February the 22nd, 1946. A young couple, Jimmy Hollis, age 25, and Jeanne Larey, age 19, had parked on a lonely road just off Richmond Road, north of town. It was the kind of spot where young people went to talk and be alone. Sometime around midnight, a man appeared at their car window. He wore a white hood over his head, with holes cut for his eyes. He carried a gun. He ordered them out of the vehicle, and then he attacked them both. He beat Jimmy Hollis savagely, striking him across the skull. He assaulted Jeanne as well, in a manner too cruel to recount in detail here. But he did not kill them. Both survived. Both were found and taken to the hospital. Jimmy Hollis could remember very little. Jeanne recalled more: the hood, the voice, the terrible calm of the man. But she had not seen his face. No one had. The police investigated. They questioned suspects. They followed leads that went nowhere. And after a few weeks, the case began to cool. People talked about it, of course, but they told themselves it was an isolated thing. A drifter, probably. Someone passing through. They were wrong. Pause. Part 2, the attacks continue. 3 weeks later, on the night of March 23rd, another couple parked on a dark road. Richard Griffin, age 29, and Pollyann Moore, age 17. They had been to a movie in town, and afterward they drove to a quiet spot just south of Texarkana. They were found the next morning in Richard's car. Both had been shot. Both were dead. There were no witnesses. No fingerprints that led anywhere useful. The scene told a grim, spare story. Someone had approached the car, someone with a gun, someone who intended to kill. But beyond that, the evidence was thin. Now the town took notice. This was no longer an isolated crime. This was something worse, something that might come again. And it did. Pause. 3 weeks after the Griffin and Moore murders, almost to the day, it happened again. April 14th, 1946, Paul Martin, age 16, and Betty Jo Booker, age 15. They were high school students. Betty Jo played saxophone in a small band, and she had performed at a dance that evening at the VFW Hall. Paul had picked her up afterward, sometime around 1:30 in the morning. They drove to Spring Lake Park, a well-known spot on the edge of town, and there, in the darkness, the hooded man found them. Paul Martin was discovered on a dirt road the next morning. He had been shot 4 times. Betty Jo Booker was found some distance away in a wooded area near the park. She had been shot twice. Both were dead. Betty Jo was still wearing her band uniform. The community was beyond frightened now. Two young people, teenagers, children really, and someone had walked out of the night and taken their lives without hesitation, without mercy, and without leaving a trace. The pattern was unmistakable. Every 3 weeks, always on a weekend, always a couple, always on a lonely road or a secluded spot after dark. Texarkana had a phantom. Pause for Part 3, A Town in Fear. It is difficult to convey the kind of fear that gripped Texarkana in the spring of 1946. Not the sharp fear of a single moment, but the slow, heavy kind that settles in and stays. The kind that changes how people live. Stores sold out of firearms and ammunition. Locks were installed where there had never been locks before. Fathers sat up at night in darkened living rooms with shotguns across their laps. Mothers pinned blankets over windows. Teenagers stopped going out after sunset. The drive-in theaters were nearly empty. The lonely roads were deserted. People looked at their neighbors differently. They looked at strangers differently. Every man who could not account for his evenings became, in someone's mind, a suspect. And the rumor spread. The phantom was a soldier, someone said. Shell shock from the war. No, he was a railroad man. No, he was someone from out of town. No, and this was the worst thought of all, he was someone they all knew, someone they sat next to in church, someone who smiled at them in the street. The newspapers, as newspapers do, gave him a name. They called him the Phantom Killer, and the name stuck because it fit. He appeared, he killed, he vanished, he left behind no face, no voice, no name. Only grief. Pause. Law enforcement mobilized in a way this part of the country had rarely seen. The Texas Rangers sent officers. The Arkansas State Police joined the effort. The FBI was consulted. A special task force was assembled under the leadership of Captain M.T. Gonzalez of the Texas Rangers, a legendary lawman known across the state. Gonzalez was a tall, imposing figure who wore 2 pistols on his belt and spoke with absolute authority. He set up headquarters in downtown Texarkana and brought order to what had been a fragmented investigation. Roadblocks were established. Patrol cars cruised the back roads all night. Undercover officers, some of them dressed as teenagers, parked on the same lonely roads where the attacks had occurred, hoping the phantom would come to them. He did not. Hundreds of suspects were questioned. Hundreds of leads were followed. Every drifter, every ex-convict, every man with a troubled past who had the misfortune of being in Texarkana during those months came under scrutiny. Polygraph tests were administered, still a relatively new technology at the time. Informants were recruited. Rewards were posted, and yet the phantom remained a phantom. Pause all. Part 4, The Last Attack. 3 weeks passed, the calendar turned, and on the night of May 3rd, the killer struck again. But this time the pattern shifted. Virgil Starks was a 36-year-old farmer who lived with his wife Katie in a farmhouse about 10 miles northeast of Texarkana. They were not a young couple parked on a back road. They were in their own home on a quiet Friday evening. Virgil was sitting in his chair by the window, listening to the radio. Katie was in another room. Sometime around 9 o'clock, 2 shots were fired through the window from outside the house. Virgil Starks was struck in the back of the head. He died almost instantly. Katie heard the shots and ran into the room. She found her husband slumped in his chair, and then the gunman fired through another window, striking her in the face. The bullet shattered her jaw, but it did not kill her. Bleeding and in terrible pain, Katie Starks managed to get to her feet, stagger out the back door, and run to a neighbor's house for help. She survived. She was the only person to survive one of the later attacks. But she had not seen the shooter. He had been outside the house, in the darkness, firing through glass. He was never more than a shadow. By the time officers reached the Starks farmhouse, the gunman was gone. A search of the property turned up footprints and not much else. The weapon was determined to be a .22 caliber firearm, consistent with the gun used in the earlier killings. The Phantom had changed his method. He had attacked a couple at home, an older couple, people who had done nothing more dangerous that evening than sit in their living room. If he could come to your home, then no one was safe. Not anywhere. Not at any time. Pause, Tatum. Part 5. The Suspect. After the Starks attack, the fear in Texarkana reached a kind of peak. Some families left town entirely. Others moved in with relatives not wanting to be alone. The pressure on law enforcement was immense, and then, in late June, a name surfaced. U.L. Swinney was a 30-year-old petty criminal with a long record of car thefts and small offenses. He was known to police. He had been in and out of trouble for years. He was a drifter, a man without steady work, a man who moved from place to place and seemed to belong nowhere. His wife, Peggy Swinney, told investigators that Ewell had been involved in the murders. She provided details. She placed him at the scenes. She described the hood. It was a startling break, but it was also, from a legal standpoint, deeply complicated. In 1946, in the state of Texas, a wife could not testify against her husband in court. Her statements to investigators, no matter how detailed, could not be entered as evidence in a murder trial. Peggy Swinney's account could guide the investigation, but it could not convict. And beyond her statements, the physical evidence tying Ewell Swinney to the crimes was thin. There was no murder weapon. There were no fingerprints. There was no confession. Swinney himself denied everything. Prosecutors made a difficult decision. Unable to bring murder charges they believed they could prove in court, they instead charged Swinney as a habitual criminal based on his long record of car thefts. Under Texas law at the time, a habitual offender could receive a life sentence, and that is exactly what happened. Ewell Swinney was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Not for murder, for stealing cars. He was paroled in 1970 after serving more than 2 decades. He lived quietly after his release and died in 1994. He never confessed. He was never formally charged with the Texarkana murders. The case was never officially closed. Pause. So, Part 6, The Long Shadow. After Swinney's arrest, the attack stopped. The 3-week cycle ended. The Phantom did not strike again. To many people in Texarkana, this was answer enough. The right man had been caught. The system had done what it could with the tools it had. Justice, if imperfect, had been served. To others, the uncertainty was harder to bear. If Swinney was the Phantom, why was there no conclusive proof? And if he was not, then who was? Was the real killer still out there, somewhere in the vast American landscape, living a quiet life while Texarkana carried its scars? Pause. The Phantom case changed Texarkana. It changed it the way a hard frost changes a garden. The town went on. It grew. People raised families and built businesses and lived full lives. But there was a before and an after, and everyone who lived through those 10 weeks knew the difference. For years, people still locked their doors with extra care. They still glanced at dark windows before drawing the curtains. Mothers still told their children to be home before dark, and there was an edge in their voices that the children did not fully understand. Not then. The case became part of the town's identity, whether the town wanted it or not. In 1976, a low-budget film called The Town That Dreaded Sundown brought the story to a wider audience. The film was sensationalized, as such films tend to be, but it kept the memory alive. People who had never heard of Texarkana suddenly knew it as the place where a hooded killer had stalked couples in the dark. The real people, the victims, sometimes got lost in the retelling. But they were real. Jimmy Hollis and Jeanne Larey, who survived the first attack and carried those memories for the rest of their lives. Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore, who went to a movie and never came home. Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker, who were 15 and 16 years old and had everything ahead of them. Virgil Starks, who was listening to the radio in his own home. Katie Starks, who took a bullet to the face and found the strength to run. They deserve to be remembered not as characters in a mystery, but as people. People with families. People who were loved. Pause. Part 7. What Remains? More than 75 years have passed since the spring of 1946. Almost no one who lived through those 10 weeks is still alive. The fear has faded. The roads where couples once parked are paved now, lined with houses and streetlights. Spring Lake Park is just a park. The farmhouse where Virgil Starks died was eventually torn down. But the question remains. It hangs in the air like the humidity of a Texas summer evening. It is the kind of question that does not demand an answer so much as it refuses to go away. Who was the phantom? Was it Ewell Swinney, a small-time thief whose own wife said he was a killer? The circumstantial case against him is the strongest that exists. The timing of his arrest and the end of the attacks is difficult to ignore. Many investigators then and now believe he was the man, but belief is not proof. And in the absence of proof, there is only silence. Some cases are never solved, not because the truth does not exist, but because the evidence falls just short of reaching it. The Phantom case may be one of these. A story with a beginning and a middle, but no true ending. A book that closes with the last chapter missing. Pause. Texarkana still straddles the state line. It is still a railroad town at heart, though the world has changed around it. People there will tell you about the Phantom if you ask. Some of them grew up hearing the stories from grandparents who were there. They tell it the way people tell stories in small towns. Quietly, carefully, with a respect for what was lost. Because that is what lingers in the end. Not the mystery, not the manhunt, not the name of the suspect or the details of the investigation. What lingers is the loss. 5 people dead, others wounded in body and spirit, a whole community shaken to its foundations, and a figure in a white hood who walked out of the darkness, did terrible things, and disappeared. Some nights, when the wind moves through the trees along the old back roads outside of Texarkana, you can almost feel it still. Not the fear, exactly. Something quieter than that. A memory. A whisper. The echo of a question that was asked 75 years ago and has never quite been answered. Who was the Phantom of Texarkana? We may never know. Pause. This has been Small Town Secrets. Thank you for listening.